Okay, thank you. And let's move to the last panel for the day. This is looking at the space exploration panel. This has come together fairly at the last minute, but also bringing in more partners as part of this ORF space dialogue. But I think it was also kind of something that we have not really explored in any detail before in the previous editions. So this panel is going to be looking at the technical and human challenges faced during for human space exploration projects, and some of these are also going to be India's imminent obstacles and problems, because the national ambition and international cooperation in space are huge drivers for such missions. Every nation has identified their interest in space and announced their missions up till 2030. India's own Human Spaceflight Programme is an ambitious announcement that will deliver 3 Indian astronauts into the low Earth orbit. So some of the key questions are, what does this mean for India? What are the new challenges that India would embark upon successful completion of this project? Is the mission solely driven by geopolitical reasons? How will India prevent a folding of the program, as was seen during the Apollo age, and so on and so forth? So I think these are some of the key questions, but I have a 3-member panel here to look at these questions from different perspectives. So I first invite Ajay Lele to deliver his remarks, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Raji, for inviting me. In fact, tomorrow at the same time, I am going to bore you again on another subject. Okay, it's a very interesting subject. If you really look at the entire subject which is there, it is talking about ambitions and challenges of India's space program per se. So to start with, is Indian space program ambitious? To my mind, somewhat. Definitely it's not over-ambitious. But if I am asked this question, that is Indian space program ambitious, I will, instead of saying that India's space program is more a realistic space program. If you really look at it, the way India's space program has evolved over the period of time, we started in early 1960s. Subsequently, by 1980 only, India got a recognition as a space power, or a country which can launch satellites on its own. Subsequently, the program had have certain amount of bumps, few positives, few negatives, but it went on well. But the year 2005 actually was a watershed moment as far as India's space program was concerned, and India started taking a slightly different path. Here, when I'm using a word different path, that doesn't mean that India has deviated from the initial path of a space, where India has identified that space is an instrument for socio-economic development. And I think that path continues to remain same, but India added few things over here. So in 2005, we decided that we need to look at deep space also. That means at Moon and Mars. And now we have decided that by 2022, we will have an Indian out into the space. So how I could really look at this journey of India's out into the space, and is India been successful in addressing certain challenges? Is India's planning correct? There could be various arguments which could be put forward. The first and foremost thing, I think, for any spacefaring nation is to have a good vehicle to reach to the space. As far as India is concerned, India had an advantage, at the same time a very major limitation also. Owing to India's nuclear policies, India was under severe restrictions. International ban was there to transfer the technology to India. So India was not getting cryogenic engine technology to undertake launches into a geostationary orbit. So India had a basic limitation as far as launching communication satellites are concerned. For any country, communication satellite is definitely a key. And this is one area where India has lacked significantly over the years. It took time for Indian scientists also to develop the cryogenic technology on its own. I think it took slightly more amount of a time than it should have taken. The basic limitation of India's space program has emerged essentially in a communication sector because of this lack of your own cryogenic technology. So your GSLV program had lagged further. India had a very huge ambition of around having 500 transponders out there almost 10 years back. But even today, maybe India is somewhere closer to 300 transponders. So I think that was a very basic limitation as far as India's space program is concerned, and India has suffered significantly because of the issues of a transponder. But at the same time, the other vehicle which India has, the PSLV, India has actually, if I may say it correctly, milked it to the core. India has used this vehicle in a very innovative fashion and has even undertaken the Moon and Mars mission by using the same vehicle. So in a sense, in one area, India lacked significantly, but in the other area, India understood that yes, this is a vehicle which is giving a success, and they came out with multiple variants, and it has really given India a lot amount of a prestige also, because it has undertaken various successful missions by using the variants of the same vehicle. Then India went out with various missions. Most of the missions were essentially for the purposes of a socio-economic development. So if you look at it, India's investments, say in the field of science, I think India has done relatively well. In recent times at least, India has launched an Astro satellite. India is now planning to launch a satellite called Aditya, that is at L1, Lagrangian 1, essentially to study the sun. So India has got an interest, and India is making certain amount of a progress in that area. As far as remote sensing is concerned, I think India's story is a big success story. India has made significant investments into remote sensing capabilities. Today, India has got a capability of less than 1 meter resolution satellites, and it is doing pretty well. As far as Indian Armed Forces are also concerned, they are getting benefit because of this particular technology. As far as satellite navigation is concerned, India is a late starter. India has got its all 7 satellites out into the space, but it is taking some more time for actually making the system fully operational. I think as and when the system becomes fully operational, then only one can give a value judgment about the quality of India's navigational system. But the way things are making progress, I still got a lot amount of hope that it's going to be a very accurate system. Is India having a plans of expanding it further to say a global navigational system? I really don't know the answer, but yes, there are certain amount of talks and there are certain indications that it may take time, but India is keen to develop it further, but India is doing a very step-by-step approach. The other area is a communication, which I have already said that where India lacked is the transponders. Then let's look at few other areas. As far as deep space missions are concerned, India has got 2 successful missions in the first go, that is mission to Moon and mission to Mars. But where India lacked, to my mind at least, is the planning of the second missions. Because we did our first mission to Moon in 2008, and today we are talking of 2019, and still our second mission may go to the Moon in the next month. So there is a lag of almost 10 years. So the way Rajeshwari was talking about what happened after Apollo, I think was there certain amount of confusion as far as policies are concerned, that after reaching Moon, what should be the next step? You look at India's mission to Mars also. 2014 we went to the Mars. It takes 26 months to get an opportunity to revisit Mars again. But I don't think so that till 2020 India will be having any mission to the Mars. So from that perspective, again, as far as deep space is concerned, I think there is a certain amount of a confusion, at least to my mind, that we really don't know what should be the next steps. This brings me to the issue of investing into resources. Are you looking at a deep space, particularly missions to Moon and Mars, as an investment towards understanding what sort of a natural resources which you can actually get from those places, or you got certain other plans? I think there needs to have a certain amount of clarity, because to carry forward the same argument, India has not planned any missions to asteroids. I think this is one area where India is lacking. As far as India's human mission is concerned, it's a very interesting mission. We have got a very ambitious mission, I must say, that we want to have a human mission by 2022. Here again, I find there is a certain amount of a dichotomy as far as India's planning is concerned. India was making investments into a vehicle akin to a space shuttle vehicle, but now since we have got to put a mission out into a very less amount of a time, you are looking for a vehicle something akin to Soyuz. So what happens to your own program of Avatar, the space vehicle? I think that is also going to be a challenge. So I think, and as far as India's space program is concerned, it is a mixed bag. There are more amount of successes, less amount of problems as far as plannings are concerned. Let's take the case of, say, India making a world record by launching 104 satellites. I think this is one of the very unique cases of launching so many satellites in one mission. But after that, we have not seen such a big missions. There could be reasons that we may not have that sort of a clientele which has come up that we want so many satellites. That also could be one of the reasons why we may not be having so much of missions. But I think India needs to learn that just making a world record has got no meaning. Coming second, third in the world has got no meaning. You need to make a progress in a very systematic fashion, and you need to identify the areas, because space is such a vast domain that you can't say that I will do everything. I think this may be the place where India is lacking. Otherwise, to my mind, India's ambitions as far as India's space program are concerned are right in place, but we need to be slightly more focused. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. And let's move on to the second speaker, Dr. Siddharth Pandey.
Very good evening to everyone. Thank you so much, Raji, for the last minute hop on the bus for space exploration. So I will give a short intro. I think it's already up there, but just to put things a little into perspective into what is to follow with my comments on this exciting topic. So I have just recently returned to India and taken up a full-time position at Amity University. And we are establishing a Center of Astrobiology Research in Mumbai and a Space Exploration Center in the Noida campus. And the idea is to have an inclusive environment to start projects both with industry, within India and outside India, as well as the government. And I've been working outside India for the last 7 years. I was at NASA Ames. I'm an engineer by background. And I've worked with astrobiologists, so we look at studying the origins and distribution of life in the universe, so finding life, proof of life on Mars, icy moons. So that was my background. And my work was on the hardware side of things, so building systems for collecting samples and things like that. But since 2015, we've been working with the Department of Science and Technology on exploring some regions in India that are Mars analogs. And we've join the dialogue on what really are the objectives, the scientific objectives for people within India, and what are the projects that we would like to see, materialize in space from that perspective. So that's to give you an overview of the background from which I come from. In my mind, I feel that ISRO really needs to have a strong roadmap that talks about not just missions, but what are some of the questions that we want to tackle? What are the challenges that we want to take up? And once those are in place, we can take the missions and attach them to those questions. I think that's the way to do it, rather than having technologies and missions in place and trying to fit things into it, because what really then happens is just like Ajay sir pointed out, is that you have a mission in 2008 and then a long gap before you have a next mission. Whereas if you have a roadmap in place, a realistic one, a pragmatic one, achievable within the capabilities of the human resource and technology capabilities of ISRO, then you can plan things out, and that prevents new governments from coming in and changing things. And this is not just a problem we see in India. We see it in all space agencies around the world, that it's always difficult to have a goalpost in place for more than 4 to 5 years. There's always a change. We've seen that at NASA. We've seen that in ESA. The advantage in India is that we are, I think, a very good mix of doing economic projects and doing exploration projects. We are the right size. Our budgets are in place to be able to do a bit of both. And I feel that India can play a leadership role in the Asia-Pacific region to work with our neighboring countries and formulate projects so that we can display our leadership in the region, and at the same time partner with countries such as the US and the European Space Agency, and partner with them on the large-scale missions. So we do not really need to commit to ambitious exploration projects for Mars. We can start with having a payload coming from India, or being part of landing discussions and contribute hardware. So I think that's really the way forward. Rather than having 5 individual rovers landing on Mars from 5 countries, the right way to do this would be to join and being part of a discussion and contributing to ongoing projects. That would extremely reduce the cost of whatever missions are being planned, and at the same time help us achieve more from an exploration point of view. Technology demonstration aside, I think those can be done, but at the same time, if India really wants to be the first country to prove whether or not life existed on Mars, this would be the way to go, to have a mission, for instance, in partnership with another country or 2 countries and take things forward. Because what then otherwise will really happen is we will operate within the bandwidth that we have as of now. As we all know, ISRO is a small agency. It can only plan out so many things at a particular amount of time, and then missions get pushed off, into the future. So I think some of the challenges that we face is firstly having a roadmap in place, being inclusive when it comes to building of this roadmap. I think organizations outside of ISRO within India should consolidate and be part of this discussion process and not just limited to decision makers within ISRO for this. And I have been working from my astrobiology point of view with colleagues to consolidate ourselves and have a working group in place so we can come out with a white paper and work with ISRO towards that. I think similar groups which have scientific interest should do the same and eventually have, just by a show of hands, I'm curious, how many scientists in this room? Just 2 or 3 hands. So we need more scientists at these dialogues because at the end of the day, it's not just technologists. I'm an engineer, I'm not a scientist. We need more people who can give us the right motivations for going into space from a civilian point of view, not just from the military point of view, which is as important. Another point that I should also touch on is there has to be a strong distinguishing between civilian space projects and military space projects in India. I think that's extremely important to ensure that both these lines of activities, in my mind, equally important, but there has to be that delineation. Of course, communication across, but it has to be 2 different agencies managing the projects. And I believe that there's been some updates. There perhaps are some plans for a military organized space organization in the country. But I think that's really important so that we can have discussions with regards to exploration, scientific projects on one side, and on the national security point of view on the other side, without really being too much of suffering in that sense. So I think that's important. Like I said, consolidation of scientific community is important. And lastly, and I'm hoping Divyanshu will touch on it, is the importance of education. It's important for private universities and schools to be part of education outreach, and space is an excellent tool to pull students at an early age, not even if into space, into STEM. And if we want to ensure that engineers of this country are not joining consultancy firms or becoming lawyers or financial bankers, no harm in that. But if you want to have more scientific research happening, engineers doing projects, space projects, we need to ensure that education outreach is a strong component of this roadmap. I think that has to be a working group by itself where we have educators, both at the school and university level, working with scientists and engineers within the Indian space community, formulating ways in which we can ensure that all of these activities are inclusive and we don't leave out that. So with that, I think I will end and over to you, Raji. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the last panelist, Divyanshu.
So, hello everyone, and a couple of disclaimers. The first one is that I was informed that I'll be a part of this panel only as of like 50 minutes ago. So, I definitely do not have a lot of, shall I say, preparation or insight that has gone into doing this. But at the same time, this is something that I feel strongly about, and I feel strongly about space exploration and even more so about human space exploration. So I thought that this was a good opportunity to share my few thoughts with you. Another disclaimer that I would like to give is that I will be talking about a lot of things, not space, not technology, not, shall I say, specific to India. I shall be talking more about the need for human space exploration for humanity as a whole. And for that, I would like to give you a small history lesson. So the first thing that happened was that we evolved into Homo sapiens in the African savanna. And then from there, we spread out across the globe and we started exploring everything around us. First, we used to live as small survival and familial units. Then, as we explored more and more, we realized we evolved into tribes, and from there, we started exploring more and more. And that's where we reached about 12,000 years ago, where we had the agricultural revolution. What that led to is that we detached ourselves from the food chain. Suddenly, we could produce our own food and survive, and we did not have to live in the jungle anymore. And that led us to form townships and form cities and explore further. These cities became kingdoms. Then kingdoms happened, and then about 400 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution brought in the age of exponential exploration. We circumnavigated the globe, we globe mapped the complete globe, and we became countries. Now, as we became countries, suddenly there was a system breakdown. And this system breakdown was first World War I, second World War II. And World War II was like exponential breaks to the exponential exploration. And that led to a very, very precarious balance that we arrived at, where we had a big boy who told everyone what to do, and everyone followed because we couldn't explore anymore, and it was just not possible. And we had reached that point where there was nowhere to go. And what started happening is that we started going back in. And that led to the era or the rise of, shall I say, right-wing nationalism. And we saw the rise of Modi, the rise of Trump, the rise of so many of these other right-wing politicians, where we are starting to go back in because there's nowhere more to go. We've become countries, we've mapped the globe, we've circumnavigated. So now we're becoming countries again, and now we'll go back to becoming states, maybe cities again, and maybe tribes again. But there's another way. And that way is that we go back to our roots, we find that sixth layer in the Maslow's pyramid, and we start exploring again. And we have this amazing cosmological endowment for us to explore. And we can go to the Mars, we can go to other moons, other planets, and other galaxies, and so many of these interesting things that we can do. So let's not go back in, let's go out there and let's explore. And that's the core message that I wanted to share, and that's what kind of incited me to do this 50 minutes ago. But on a more tangible front for today's panel, as Siddharth said, that I maybe talk about a little bit of education. So I work a lot with space technology education, and I specifically say space technology education because there are a lot of people who do science education. There is astronomy and so many of these other things that we do. But to enable science, we'll always sort of need technology. And when it comes to India, I personally feel that we sort of ignore the technology aspect of it, and we really need to do more about it. Some of the things that I sort of have started doing was that I had India's one and only commercial model rocketry company, where I give students an opportunity to build and fly model rockets, which in countries like United States, UK, is something which is fairly prevalent and easy to access, but over here is not so much. So that's one thing that we do. We do some advanced level projects where we built amateur rockets and also some high altitude balloons with students to sort of give them a hang of how to build systems, how to think of them on a systems level design, how to look at engineering problems and try and solve them, how to face failure. This tends to be one of the biggest teachings that when I started doing this, I did not realize that that would be so important, because students are not ready to fail. And if you're going to be building things that you don't know how to build, you may fail. And so that's how to face failure and how to keep going forward in the face of failure. So these are a few things that we need to teach as a part of a value system for our space scientists and our rocket scientists, and that's what we try to do. And I've worked with more than 1 lakh to 20,000 students over the last 24 months. We've collaborated with more than 300 schools, 25 colleges, trying to get to as many people as possible and try to show them this world where we don't need to go back in and be states and countries. We need to go out and explore. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Divyanshu. So we have nearly come to the end of our time, but I'm going to take a quick round of questions from the floor and get back to the panelists. Susmita.
I just had a couple of comments. I think I really like the way Siddharth emphasized the need for a roadmap, which also sort of tied into what Dr. Lele had to say. Coming back to the reusable launch vehicle or avatar, I think everyone in this room ought to be aware that the space shuttle was also known as the space transportation system. It wasn't built to fly humans in the first place. So in my view, having been part of the human space exploration landscape for the last 20 years, I personally think it's better to have a splashdown capsule rather than have a space shuttle kind of vehicle to take us into space. Addressing one of the issues that Siddharth raised, which is very interesting, I think India, while it's a good idea to collaborate with other countries, I've spent quite some time in Europe, I've been part of the space station program. If you look at the continuity of some of the programs, every 4 years when the president of the United States changes, he changes the head of NASA and the center heads change. So, if Bush wanted to go to moon, Obama said Mars, Trump says moon. And I can tell you that European partners and others who collaborate with them, there are programs where you spend millions of dollars, you're in the test phase, and suddenly it gets dropped. So I think we need to be, from a strategic point of view, do both, but also make sure that we are not left high and dry when someone just changes direction. I think continuity in the Indian and Chinese space program, I think, are our strengths, and we should build on it, but also, yes, collaborate. Divyanshu, I think it was fantastic that you sort of took us on a philosophical, exploration of sorts. I think what happened, personally, I'm of the view that what happened to commercial aviation in the last century is going to happen to spaceflight in this century, right? So I think India should also look beyond its domestic mandate and see how it can be an international player. For example, should we be thinking of having a commercial spaceport? Because in Sriharikota, we have 3 launch pads and back-to-back launches. We don't have enough capacity. Can we provide, I in fact had a conversation with one of our MPs from Thiruvananthapuram. Can we consider a commercial spaceport off of Kerala, for example? And I think what Divyanshu and Siddharth both mentioned, whether you talk of science or applied sciences and technology, we often forget the artistic side of the human experiment. I just came back from Paris. I attended a workshop at the home of the co-founder of JPL, Frank Molina, who had to leave the United States during the Vietnam War when the FBI started a file on him as a communist. So he moved to Paris. He was a kinetic artist and a rocketeer, right? So I grew up with some of the pioneers of the Indian space program. You could talk to them about architecture, about design, about art. So we also need to use the right side of our brain. And I have met some amazing artists who have participated in space exploration, especially in the European side and Japanese. So we need to open up that frontier as well. I think culture, art, architecture, design needs to hang out with engineering and the sciences. It's very important.
Either. I just want to disagree totally with the second speaker. I think I am a person who has the last 35 years with a higher education in research and teaching in the country. And also my background is in nuclear science and technology, which came to space. So I know in and out of the DAE very close to the, later on with the very veterans of the ISRO. I think we have a definite goal post from 1974 under sanctions and before what we had and after 1974 sanctions and 1998 sanctions, how India struggled. And over there, how we had defined our goal post and gradually with our economic ability, time to time as it developed. I totally disagree with you. Just military and exploration and all these things are different and all these things. It is, we definitely have a goal post. You try to understand. I cannot reveal everything and over here, but we definitely have a goal post. ISRO has a very calibrated goal post. And with it, which is working and taking step by step from why in Mars, why in Chandrayaan, why even with a PSLV without a GSLV, and within that period of time in 2008, everything is calibrated within our ability. That's I totally disagree totally with you with the way, but I cannot reveal anything and everything.
So, Chaitanya?
So this is beautiful because this is exactly my question. I'm actually absolutely confused right now. At one point we say that we don't have a roadmap, which is what I used to think. But then apparently there is a goalpost, there is a roadmap, but then there's this entire shroud of secrecy around it. In a space program. I mean, this is not a commercial program, this is not a commercial company. We're talking about, a space program. And maybe, Ajay, you could expand on this and, probably Siddharth, you could chime in. Why is this shroud of secrecy around it?
And the last question from the last table there.
Sir, I'm Keshav from Jamia. So my question is for Ajay sir. Sir, do you find India should go for a space command and a strategic space force? Because United States and China do have a space force. So do you feel that India should go for it?
Okay, start with you.
Last question first. I think just because United States and China has got something, we should not go for it. We should look at our security compulsions, what are our security challenges. Based on that, we should do a calibrated exercise and then opt for it. I am of a firm opinion that we should at least have a space command. Other aspect which you had raised about the secrecy part of it. I personally don't feel so that there is much of a secrecy. I think particularly after the anti-satellite test, this is the only country which has officially announced that we have conducted anti-satellite test. So from that point of view, there is no secrecy. We knew that we can't develop a cryogenic technology just by battling eyelids. It took time. So everybody knew about it. As far as these missions are concerned, our second moon mission, even though I have criticized that it has taken 10 years, but our second moon mission was supposed to be in collaboration with Russia. Russians had opted out at the last. So it had taken time. But my only issue was that it had taken more amount of a time. I personally don't feel so that there is a more amount of a secrecy in program. Only thing is that there are certain amount of a ways the way we express it. We will say that this is a remote sensing satellite meant for humanitarian things, other things, blah, blah, blah. People understand that it is actually meant for what. So I don't think so that there is a secrecy part of it. We are pretty open about it. Yeah. Yeah, please.
So this morning when Mr. Pandey had his great presentation, he's showing all of these technologies that are probably in the works. So that's the technological roadmap, but the strategic roadmap of how these technologies would be sort of utilized in the future and for what is the question.
You see, what happens is that every technology got its own life cycle. So just because there is a technology, I can't say that it will be used in a specific fashion. There's a mention which was made to 3D printing. Now people have started printing things on an international space station also. So the technology is evolving. What at this point in time, to my mind and my understanding, India is doing is that India is looking at various technologies, looking for a best suit. If you really look at India's program, why it has been called frugal engineering? Because we are trying to look for technologies which are good, but at the same time which are economical. So what we want to achieve in lesser amount of money, in lesser time, great success. It takes time for that.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Who should I start with?
Pick your two top ones.
The two top ones, okay. So, I respect your opinion, and I also know where you're coming from. I also feel that, like I mentioned, there has to be, we have to distinguish between military space and civil space. If you feel that the Chandrayaan mission was a strategic mission that we cannot openly talk about, I think then there is a difference of opinion. And the discussion ends when you say that there's information that you have, a plan that you have that we cannot talk about, because it's difficult to have a conversation.
We'll have it.
So that's my comment to it, that to have an open public discourse, and especially when it comes to civilian space, which I feel has its own space within the space agency, it has to be open for discussions. It's a place for scientific work, it's a place for national ambition, and that should be kept at that. Military role in deep space should not be confused with what was planned to be achieved with Chandrayaan or Mangalyaan. That is my opinion. And we need more information from the government or for persons within the government to have that kind of a discussion. And I also respect your view that there has to be an optimized plan when it comes to individually having a mission as well as collaborating. I am of the opinion that it was good that India did not participate in the International Space Station. Not many people know that the International Space Station was supposed to be a gateway to reach the moon. That was the entire purpose in which it was firstly put in place. And then, where are we right now? We don't need it to go to the moon. We can directly fly to the moon. So it's good that India did not invest in it, and we're planning our own mission. But there has to be a lot more inclusiveness when we're talking about global space projects. There's a lot of projects we're doing with the US and Russia and US and Europe. So that should continue. But there has to be an optimized way. It shouldn't just be either this or that.
Divyanshu?
So yes, I do believe that there is a lot of space for artists and so many of these other, shall I say, non-technical aspects of exploration, and that's what my whole perspective was about, where we look at space exploration and human space exploration as something which is human and not just from the perspective of technology and from the perspective of the so-called economic or the military or the whatever strategic benefits we might want to execute with it.
Thank you, and I think with that we are going to close this panel. But I just want to leave with two bullet points. One is about the discussion on whether we should have, and I agree with Siddharth as well as Ajay and others who brought out the point that we need to have a systematic program, we need to have a clear agenda. And I think that should start from the political leadership who outlines a national vision for the country, national security strategy. From there, you need to be able to clearly identify what is that I want to do within the space domain, if this is where I want to take India by 2030. And that vision is missing. Whatever we have achieved in the space domain today, ISRO has done a tremendous job, but it has been said, the agenda has been by and large set by the scientific and technocrats. And that should not be the case in an ideal situation. With that, I bring this panel to a close.